What you're looking at is one of the best watches Longines currently makes, as well as one of the best GMTs outside the luxury sphere. It's a beautifully made, beautifully finished True or Traveler's GMT, which is simply known as the Hydroconquest GMT. Now, there's a lot to go over here. I got a lot to say, and especially about the controversial design and the price. So we're just going to jump into this one. And I think the first question a lot of you are going to have is, what's the quality like? And I think the best answer to that is that this is an Omega-Lite watch, not like light, as this is a watch that's getting really close to the Omega levels of quality, but it's not quite there yet. So it's more premium and not necessarily luxury. And that makes perfect sense as to where Longines is in this watch's brand collection. Where Longines stops, Omega starts. And I think this goes for the case finishing, the bracelet, and the movement itself. And I can tell you that this is a watch when you first pick it up, you'll immediately notice and feel the level of quality to it. The finish is beautiful, the fit is great, everything's got a nice sort of smooth touch to it, and the articulation of the bracelet is great. The finishing of the case here is almost entirely brushed, with just a beautiful deep grain to it. The ceramic bezel is practically perfect with a fantastic 120-click unidirectional action. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But in short, it's truly a bezel done right. The dial is crisp and clean with a little bit of depth. Not a lot, but just enough to keep things interesting. And while the movement isn't an Omega in-house coaxial special, it is a high-end true GMT that's currently exclusive to Longines. One with 72 hours of power reserve and running at the very unusual, very Omega-like 25,200 vibrations per hour, which isn't something you see very often, as it's kind of sitting there right in between the standard 21.6 and 28.8 movements. It's a movement that tries to hit the sweet spot in terms of smooth sweep, extra power, and precision. Something that perhaps Seiko should have taken notice of with their 6R series. Now currently this movement is used here as well as with the more popular Spirit Zulu GMT. And the only difference I've seen between the two is that the Spirit is a COSC certified movement. But even with that, this one that isn't COSC certified has been running at negative 1.5 seconds a day. So no complaints here. Although, unlike the Spirit Zulu, this one has a bracelet very few people complain about. The bracelet's practically perfect. It's a beautifully brushed H-link design, which when combined with the tight-fitting female end links not only looks great, but also gives you maximum flexibility when conforming to your wrist. And it's paired with a fantastic taper going down to 16 millimeters. The clasp here is of course milled with great push-button action. And it also comes with one of the best on-the-fly adjustment systems I've seen. It's very similar to the Manta Note X system or what's on the new Christopher Ward Lumiere, where it's this sort of push button on the inside clasp. But here, the entire mechanism moves back and forth rather than extending a small bar, and it seems more solid and more smoother than those. However, again, it's not perfect, just practically perfect, as it is missing a quick release on the end links, the one thing the Spirit Zulu has going for it. Or even drilled lugs, just something to help make strap changes easier. Lug width here is also 21 millimeters, which doesn't necessarily matter when you're wearing it with a bracelet, but again, if you want to swap to some sort of strap, 21 millimeters is one of those odd in-between sizes. Although most unusual and maybe most confusing of all is that it actually secures the links with push pins. Not screws, not a pin and collar system, but regular old friction-based cotter or push pins. Now granted, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. There's plenty of watches out there, most of which in the budget category, that use those perfectly fine. And granted, these are actually the beefiest, nicest looking cotter pins I've ever actually seen. But it's still kind of odd to see at this price. And kind of disappointing that Swatch makes you spend thousands more on an Omega before they'd even give you a screw. Yet the important thing is that the bracelet is still pretty great, and especially so on the wrist, with a really comfortable all-day fit. And at just under 13 millimeters, it's not necessarily dress watch thin, but thin enough to travel the world with without too much hassle. However, one thing to be aware of here is the size. There are actually two different versions of the Hydroconquest GMT. There's a 43 and then this one a 41 millimeter. But thanks to the slightly longer 49.5mm lug-to-lug here, as well as I think the bigger crown guards, this one, even though it's a 41, I think wears closer to a 42, so it wears larger on the wrist. So if you've gone down the sub 40mm rabbit hole and you don't really want to come back, this is a watch that will disappoint you. You're not going to be happy with how it wears. However, if you do like a 42mm diver, this one's going to feel great. Now, personally, I think Longines kind of made a mistake with the sizing here. 43 and 41 is kind of an odd choice, and I think the reason they did that is because the regular Hydroconquest follows that. But personally, I think they should have dropped that a little bit, offered flat 42 and a flat 40. I think that would offer more options people would want. Now, let's move on to the design, and if you haven't picked up on this already, this one is basically a sub. It's a very sub-like case, although maybe one done as more of a straight tool watch, where it has fully brushed sides instead of the giant, waiting to be scratched, polished billboards. And this particular colorway is basically an inverted Kermit, if there was a Kermit GMT Master. Because if you remember the Kermit, that's one with a black dial and a green bezel, and here you got a green dial with a black bezel. But going even further, sub has primarily dots with dashes at the cardinal points, and here you have primarily dashes with dots at the cardinal points. So they just sort of swapped all this around. Now, they still have the triangle at the top, and the best way I can describe this handset is that it's kind of a anorexic snowflake. But bottom line, it's kind of this odd inverted sub, which I think is strange to see out of Longines, especially because the Hydroconquest for years has had its own design language, a distinct one that's been taken after the regular Conquest, just mixed with an Arabic dial. Now, the Hydroconquest isn't necessarily a favorite among enthusiasts, but it's been a long-established design, and it's kind of an odd choice from Longines to basically ditch that and create a GMT Master homage. Or at least odd from an artistic or design standpoint. From a business one, maybe this makes perfect sense, as they've created a good GMT Master alternative at a fraction of the price. Now, Longines has had GMTs in the past, but the missing design element that this one has is this new true GMT movement, which makes this a true alternative to the GMT Master. So once they created that, I think they may have just decided to go with this design to take full advantage of that. And in some ways, this puts the watch in kind of an odd position, which is why I say it's sort of controversial. Because for some people, this is going to be way too much of a homage, it's going to be way too much of a sub. Yet for others who are sub fans, that's what they're looking for, this may not be sub enough for them. And that seems to be a lot of the comments I see online about this one. Now, the altered design didn't bother me at all. I think it's just as effective as a regular sub. And with this green colorway, while not necessarily having the best contrast, is still pretty easy to read and make out, all while being breathtakingly striking at times. It's not quite as vibrant as, say, Green Alpinist, but still got a heck of a presence. And in some ways, that's exactly what you want out of a good travel watch, something that can pull double duty, something that can be casual and dressy. So it's a good-looking, yet controversial, or at the very least, polarizing design. And I think that's something you could say about the idea of using a diving bezel instead of a standard 24-hour bezel on a GMT. Something that's become more of a trend, and this Longines is the reason behind it. Now, in this particular instance, Longines still put the 24-hour indicators on the outer edge of the dial, just for that GMT hand. Those indicators are a little bit small and maybe a little bit harder to read, but they are still there. But the main thing is the timing bezel, and after wearing this one for a bit, as well as some of those other watches that do this, I can tell you it's something I like. Because I've realized that a 24-hour bezel in a GMT, while traditional, is kind of a relic of the past. Now, on the initial GMTs, the very first GMTs where you couldn't independently adjust the GMT hand or the hour hand, a 24-hour bezel was needed there just in order to keep track of the second time zone. But once movements got developed where you could independently move that GMT hand, or in this case the hour hand, 24-hour bezel kind of became redundant. You could use it to track a third time zone, but very few people ever do. So for most people, I think there's a definite argument here that a timing bezel would be more useful, as a timing bezel can be used for a variety of things, not just diving. And here, I think it also gives the watch a more distinctive look. Lume here is also a little bit disappointing. Unfortunately, the design isn't overly interesting. There's not a lot going on here that's different, and the bezel just has a single lume pip at the top. And while my longevity test shows it to last as long as a standard Seiko diver, it doesn't seem to look quite as bright to my eyes. And that's been my impressions when wearing it, so effectively, I'll say it's a little bit worse than my $300 Seiko Monster. And lastly, let's talk price and value. And for this one, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. So the bad news is that the MSRP here is $3,100 US. However, before you start writing angry comments, the good news is that you won't necessarily find it for that. Because it's been overshadowed by the new release Spirit Zulu, you're more likely to find some deals on this one than that. And especially if you're looking used, which is how I bought this one. I just happened to be looking online, saw a price that I thought was too good to be true, and decided I should check it out. So if you are interested in this one, seriously look around a bit. And one thing to remember is that this is a premium watch, and it's priced accordingly. Like I said, it's Omega-Lite. And then you take that and throw in the rule of diminishing returns people always talk about, and you start to understand why people love this one. Even though it's fairly expensive, most of the reviews out there are fairly positive on it and recommend it wholeheartedly. I mean, even here with what I've been talking about, there are a few odd things about it, but overall it's a pretty great watch. Yet, at the same time, and this is what I really wanted to talk about, a watch like this I think shows a very interesting disconnect in the watch community between the different divisions of collectors as well as reviewers. One between those that primarily look at big and brand name watches, and those like me who often look at smaller watch brands and micro brands. So for instance, let's say I'm someone that only looks at big name brands, and if I were to jump into this from say my Seiko Alpinist GMT, I think that price is very reasonable. As compared to that Alpinist, everything here quality-wise is a huge upgrade, and especially the movement. As the stock accuracy on my Alpinist, the whole 6R series in general, kind of sucks. So from that perspective, and you take in the law of diminishing returns, this watch makes perfect sense and it's an easy recommendation. It's perfect for those that want something more premium, hence a lot of those positive reviews. Yet, for someone like me who looks at smaller brands and micro brands much more often, and as someone who rarely looks at name brands in this price range, as I don't typically have connections to send them to me, and if I look at one, I gotta buy it. So for someone like me, this is a much tougher pill to swallow and to recommend. Because when you look at brands like Christopher Ward, Jack Mason, Monta, Formex, the quality of the Longines is still higher than those, but it's fractionally so. It's not as much of a leap as, say, from a Seiko. And then when you look at the weak points of the Hydroconquest, the poor lume here, the push pin bracelet, that there's no quick release, and granted these are smaller things, but they're also little amenities that make owning a watch so much better. And these are things that those other brands have standardized and always give you. Yet for some reason, Swatch thinks you need to pay more in order to get them. And when you take all of that in with that perspective, this becomes much harder to recommend. Which is one of the reasons I always recommend that if you're serious about buying something, to watch multiple reviews from multiple reviewers. Because not everyone is looking at things the same way, and they'll have their own different perspective. And the best thing for you is to understand those different perspectives. Bottom line though is that this is an odd yet truly amazing timepiece. And I think if you're fixed on this design, you kind of like the sub yet not sub thing going on here, and you like a slightly larger watch, and you really truly want the best, a watch that you can instantly pick up and feel the quality, then this one is one that's out there for you. And the only thing I would recommend is shop around a little bit to find the best price. And with this all brush design, don't be afraid to get something used. For everyone else though, for those kind of on the fence about the design yet still want a true or traveler's GMT, well, for you, I recommend checking out some of the micro brands out there that have good 9075 base GMTs. As at this point, there are plenty of great ones out there, with my favorite being the Jack Mason Stratotimer. Now for me, I'm honestly not sure what I'm going to do with this one, because as it is, I have too many GMTs and I really don't need another. So right now I'm thinking that if I keep this one, I should sell my Green Alpinist GMT. They're a little too similar to keep both. But I'm honestly kind of torn between this and the Alpinist, as I like the Alpinist design more. I think it's a little more comfortable on the wrist, yet the quality and the accuracy of this one is really appealing. So I guess we'll see. But in the meantime, as usual, let me know your thoughts on this one down below, as well as what's your favorite GMT out there, as well as what do you think about the Spirit Zulu. And as always, you guys know what to do down below. Like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff really helps the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.